Hi there, it's Susan again. I'm here this time to talk about the Scorpio solar eclipse that's coming up on the 25th of October. This time I set the chart for Greenwich time, which is just outside of London, England, and that's because it's universal time. I just wanted to kind of give an overview of this eclipse here in this video, and I'm going to later on do sign-by-sign analysis for this eclipse. It's definitely going to be an interesting one, to say the least. There will be another eclipse on the 8th of November, which I'll also address in a different video. Nonetheless, this is going to be quite intense just simply because it's in Scorpio, and that by any definition will lend a certain amount of intensity. And then we see that the sun and the moon and Venus are all together in Scorpio, and it's extremely close. When we see Venus in Scorpio conjunct this new moon solar eclipse, it suggests that there's something quite important around money, relationships, diplomacy, values, everything that we like, all of our stuff. But there we have the South Node eclipse. And the South Node eclipse is always going to be about something leaving, disappearing, being taken away. It's an energy that moves towards a spiritual tendency, a tendency of simplifying or moving towards sort of a higher principled way of living rather than a materialistic way of living. And so the South Node never bodes well on Venus for markets and things like that. So I think this is going to be one of the big things that we will see. And we're already seeing, by the way, around this time, because this eclipse is already, we're very much under the influence of this eclipse already, as I'm making this on the 13th of October. So it's definitely something that is going to be a theme for a while to come. This is not just a one-off thing, but it continues for weeks and weeks to come. And I think we may not see the results of this until the full moon comes in May in 2023. Certainly by the end of May of 2023, when the nodes are going to pass that point, we're going to get some kind of recollection of what was going on at this time. So you might want to make a note of what's going on in your life and take down some thoughts and ideas, and then come back to that in May, certainly from the 18th or 19th of May. And just have a look at what's going on there, kind of like seeing the consequences of all the things that have started in this period. It's hard to know where to begin. You know, these are really intense times, and there's a lot of frustration, a lot of disconnection, a lot of misunderstanding, and a lot of challenge in the world that we're living in. So I'm just going to try and parse this out bit by bit as we go through the chart of this eclipse. Again, this is a general reading. I will be more specific sign by sign in a separate video, but keep in mind that what I'm saying here applies to individual lives as well as our collective experience. But importantly, because whenever there's an eclipse, things tend to accelerate. Let's say they change quickly. There are unexpected and sudden events that come up in the area of life around the eclipse. And so just know that often it is much more intense collectively to go through these things than it is on an individual basis. So even if some of the things that I say might sound really intense and challenging, keep in mind that that doesn't necessarily apply to you in your individual life. This really depends on a person's chart. Initially, of course, the age that they are, the cycle of life that they're in, all the different factors that make you up as an individual will be affected differently by this solar eclipse than the collective message. I feel really that when we are forewarned, we are forearmed, and we have a better sense of how to deal with crises or things as they come up. And so for the most part, you will also notice that a lot of what I say is actually stuff that you're already aware of. So this Venus and South Node connection is always going to be a wee bit challenging. It's where the South Node is, it takes away. So it's really, again, about this potential for market loss, for financial issues. This can also be, you know, in an individual chart, we would say, for example, that there would be like this sense of feeling sacrificing yourself in love, or not caring so much about relationships, or never being satisfied because you're lacking your own direction. You don't want to put your attention in that direction. You want to go in the opposite direction of the North Node, and that's what's got your attention. But we can say that in terms of our collective experience, when Venus is there on the South Node, we're definitely looking at some kind of loss in the marketplace. This can also have to do with money. By the way, it's something, like currencies and money markets. We're already seeing rapidly in the last couple of weeks, but certainly already since the spring, an increasing trend towards new money markets, new ways of working with money. Now, on the one hand, this was already the case because Uranus moved into Taurus in May 2018. And so that already shook up our sort of monetary structures and systems and ideas of what money is and what its value is. But at the same time, since January of 2022, we've had the North Node in that sign as well, in Taurus, where it's been shaking things up around money. And now, of course, with the South Node exactly opposite that, with Venus on the South Node, we're looking at something that's changing quite dramatically. It's, for me, a symbol that the old is being shed. There's something that is no longer applicable. It's something that's no longer working in our situation. So also this is happening in Swati nakshatra. I'll explain a little bit more around what that means, but it's very much to do in general with a detachment and finding some kind of balance with material things in this world. So it's kind of like the Bible says, being in the world, not of it. So you use the things of the world with a kind of an awareness that it's all temporary and it's never something that you can cling to. This is anyway one of the kind of energies of Scorpio as opposed to Taurus, but certainly it's the message of Swati Nakshatra and the energy that we're finding with Ketu there, and the sun, moon, and Venus all together. I'll go more into detail around the nakshatras later because they do complete the story in a brilliant way, I find, and gives us a lot more understanding of what the process of this eclipse could be for us. We're going to find Venus is combust the sun just before this eclipse, and then she'll slowly move ever so slightly beyond the sun by the time of the eclipse. So that really is taking shape in this already now as I'm speaking, but she gets very exactly combust on the 22nd, so 3 days before this eclipse. And then on the 23rd, she moves into Scorpio along with the sun. And so that energy of Scorpio is something intense. Venus conjunct the sun adds to this kind of intensity, and it adds also to the mystery or the sort of intrigue that Scorpio always carries with it. With Venus in Scorpio, there's a lot of emphasis on, again, I'm sorry to keep using this word, passion and intensity. Scorpio is just known for that, but also known for secrecy. And that secrecy can be, for good reason. Sometimes things just need to be held secret, and sometimes for the reasons of needing to do backroom deals and do some sneaky things. And here in this particular chart that I'm using, because it's got a location, now we can see a rising sign. I don't usually rely on the rising sign, but I'm doing that this time simply because I find that it just adds another element to the description. And again, this is global. This is not necessarily personal to you. You can set a chart for wherever you are and see where the ascendant will be. And so when we see all of that Scorpio in the 12th house, which is about that kind of hidden, mysterious aspect of life, it's not necessarily obvious. It's a very mystical part of the chart as well. So there can be a lot of shenanigans that are not making sense, which pretty much describes the evening news if you watch it. I would highly recommend, given that Mars, which is in a square to Neptune, and it's been that way for quite some time already, a few weeks already. We still have Mars squaring this Neptune at this time, and that suggests that there's also a lot of underhanded and sneaky things going on. Mars is being, that's about action, for example, and Neptune being about confusion. And equally, Neptune is in this quite challenging inconjunct also to Mercury. And Mercury in Libra in conjunct Neptune in Pisces is another way of describing commercial. Mercury Libra is commercial, it's business stuff. And there's some kind of mystery or something that's not quite showing up, not very clear. So it adds to this message of Venus and Ketu, Venus and the South Node. I'm not liking this because it's a lot of backhanded stuff. It's these things that are under the table kinds of deals. Mercury Neptune can be super creative. That in an individual chart, I would look for other aspects before describing the person as unreliable. But that could also very much mean something very positive in an individual chart. But when we see it in a chart that represents an event or a collective experience, then it's not so positive. I see that as something that is much more about the mind or the intelligence or the thinking capacity being clouded by propaganda, by things that are not honest, by things that are not being clear for deliberate or accidental reasons. And so this is definitely a time with that Mars and Neptune and Mercury Neptune. I think this is definitely a time to, take care of what you're thinking, what you're feeling, how you act, decisions, and equally, this is a very important time for us collectively to take great care in what we say, how we act, the choices that we make going forward. We're not seeing things clearly. And it has to be said, we are in a state of war, accelerating every day, literally. We are being propagandized, regardless of which side you're on. And so it's really hard. You must really search for independent news media. You must really search for information. What you read in mainstream newspapers and on television or on the mainstream channels is absolutely not accurate. And you must have a sense of filtering through the motives of the particular place you're getting the news from before you believe what you're hearing. And this is ever so important right now because we are in a very, very delicate time. We also see at this time when we have Venus, Moon, and Sun together can generally be quite a pleasant thing. However, Venus and the Moon are not in good, what you could call dignity. This is not an easy energy. Scorpio doesn't really work so well with Venus and the Moon. It's a Mars energy. And so that brings up issues of passion once again and intensity, but also potentially jealousy as well, especially in an individual chart, we would, perhaps see signs of that. Possessiveness and a kind of a controlling energy. And then this also is where there can be manipulation, to be honest, and issues that are not entirely above board. So to manipulate and describe things or feel, emotions that can lead to emotional manipulation. This is also something that's very important to recognize. And I want to factor that into what I just said about propaganda and about not seeing things clearly and about not being sure what actions are being taken or which action to take as you go forward. So just bearing that in mind. And again, in an individual's chart, I would say there's loads of positive qualities to those features as well. But I must say again, when I'm looking at this collectively as an event, the energy is not going to be favorable or positive. Venus is not going to give the best results in Scorpio. The Venus and Moon conjunct the Sun, they're invisible. They're too close to the Sun. They've been, if you like, burnt by the Sun, and they need to re-emerge. This is that phase of rebirth, if you like, as Venus being reborn. Not quite now. It'll be over the next few weeks, but it's not a visible Venus. It's difficult to see, and so again it adds to that air of secrecy and mystery, etc. And so to add to the fun, we also have Mars, not as it's moving out of that square with Neptune, is moving into an inconjunct, or what you call a quincunx, with Pluto at 26 degrees of Capricorn. So it doesn't quite arrive there, but it's close, and we want to see all of those things that jump out at us. This is a degree away, so really significant, less than a degree, in fact, and so quite significant. And when we see that energy between Mars and Pluto, we're also seeing this is that martial energy of war, of assertion, aggression, activity, especially in Gemini, which is about words and commerce. And as I mentioned in earlier videos, this is actually similar to the US chart, with the a rising sign being in Sagittarius and Mars being in the 7th house. So we're seeing that kind of in real time. The US Mars is also being affected directly by these eclipses as well. And this is something that is going to add to the, I'm sorry to use that word again, intensity of this moment, and particularly where we have this challenge between Pluto and Capricorn, which is all about banking and big business and changing the way that we are ruled in many ways. Capricorn is all about authority and traditional ways of organizing things, traditional ways of doing things. And Pluto goes in there and says that doesn't work anymore. And that's been since the end of 2007. We'll get that again off and on between 2023 and 2024 as Pluto moves into Aquarius and then back into Capricorn twice, because it moves so slowly, and there's going to be the retrogrades intervening to just keep pulling it slightly back into Capricorn before finally fully going into Aquarius in 2024. So big things going on. This is an energy of real challenge. Inconjuncts require a lot of adjustment, and particularly because things are not clear. Once again, that message of things not being clear, things not being entirely reliable, and being like a big itch that needs scratching, that's not finding any kind of solution. The other aspect of this is that Mercury is also in conjunct Neptune. So again, that quincunx, again, that's challenging energy. Mercury in conjunct Neptune is more confusion, more delusion, more propaganda. So Mercury is in a trine to Mars, which is quite supportive. But because of this challenge with Neptune, it's adding to a lot of complications. Mercury trine Mars can be really good ease of communication, and I certainly wish that could be the case in the event of some kind of diplomatic discussions, which so far have not been able to happen because NATO and particularly America has decided that they did not want those conversations to happen, and that was already happening in March and April. It's quite infuriating when you think of how much destruction and the cost of lives that this has created over the last few months, where there could have been a path to peace, and the results of any negotiations are not going to be better than what they could have been already in March and April. Sorry, I get exasperated by all of this stuff because I find it incredibly heavy what we're going through right now, and all the more so because of that sort of veil of ignorance that seems to be clouding the eyes of our leaders and the public. So in another way, if we come back to Ketu here, this is really about lifting that veil. It's about really recognizing that there's something that needs to be looked at with detachment and have a new sense of balance, recognizing that things are, particularly with that Venus, not as we thought they were. Venus on the South Node also can symbolize like needing to step back from the old way of doing things, old values, and trying to recognize a need for upgrading that. Or perhaps an observation could also be, especially with K2 and the moon, that we're not necessarily able to rely on our emotions, and that we're maybe remembering things a little bit too fondly, that they were not quite as good as they used to be. And so we're hearkening back to the past. Ketu is all about past and future. Rahu Ketu on the axis is all about past and future, both of them representing both from different perspectives. But when we're looking at this from the perspective of, are we really in the present moment realizing what's going on, or are we hearkening back to something that we thought was better in the past, or something that we hope would be better in the future, neither of which is realistic or actually happening? And so this is where we need to, again, take care that we are seeing things clearly. And I think, honestly, as I've mentioned already previously, this is not a great time to take big decisions in life. We need to go day by day and adjust our behavior and our attitudes and the things that we feel we need to do accordingly as we see things changing around us. And it doesn't mean don't live your life by any means. It's to reach out a little bit and stretch yourself, but it's not a good time to rely on the outcome. So the outcome will certainly not be what you might have thought it would be. Another thing that stands out in this chart is that Jupiter is on the Aries point. So Jupiter is at 0 degrees now, just 15 minutes of Aries, moving back into Pisces, where it will move back in already by the 28th of, so just 3 days after this eclipse. It will pick up dignity there, even though it's still retrograde, but that still makes Jupiter quite powerful, especially in the sign of Pisces. And then at that point, we're going to see Jupiter not quite conjunct, but in a sign conjunction with Neptune. And that's going to influence the weeks ahead. So again, that potential for optimism is growing after this eclipse phase, just after this particular point in the eclipse, but that can also lead to other complications. So we'll get to that in the 8th of November video when I do that one shortly. The Aries point is important because it's where things show up in the public eye. And again, here we have an inconjunct, so awkward energy. The inconjunct is, Aries to the Sun, Moon, and Venus. And so that's tension, it's awkwardness, it's not in ease, it's not a flow, it's not particularly harmonious. Jupiter has no particular dignity. It's kind of neutral in Aries, although very impulsive. Certainly Venus and the moon in Scorpio are also very impulsive, very emotion driven, very profound and hard to shake emotions. And so this will be for sure a pivotal moment of change. And again, that implies personally as well as collectively, it would be dependent on your chart to know how that's going to affect you. And do tune in for the next video where I go sign by sign and we have a look at how that's going to influence each individual. So it's certainly going to be memorable and significant, no doubt at all about that. And so this can be with Jupiter on the Aries point, and particularly Jupiter, and particularly strong at that Aries point, then that can be some kind of optimism, like a projection of, oh, there's something coming here. And I'm really, again, hoping for that. Wishing for that. And it can also be a kind of projection of wealth as well. So there can be this kind of hope that there is enough money to go around, although I'm not seeing that in any realistic way. But it can, and this is where I think we're going to kind of lean towards, it can represent carelessness as well, risk taking. Also, the moon in K2 is risky. It's a Venus K2 can also be taking risks because there's a sense of not really caring. When the nodes come against the luminaries, the sun and the moon, they are more powerful, and the sun is typically the most powerful thing in our solar system. Of course, it's the center of our solar system, and when the nodes move across it, they are capable of blocking the sun. So this is the power of the nodes. And so when they're close, something changes, something shifts. This is what gets our attention. When it's a total solar eclipse, the sky darkens even in the middle of the day. We're going to have a partial but still quite strong solar eclipse. And so the sun will darken in the middle of the day in certain regions, and we'll look at that in a moment. But just bear in mind that energy, this Aries point energy on its own, plus Jupiter, then in that inconjunct with Venus and the moon and the sun, that can be overspending as well, over optimism, and that risk taking then takes on a whole new flavor where we didn't really factor in the potentials for pitfalls. And again, I'm speaking with in mind what is going on in markets and economies around the world, but also politically what we're going through, especially here in Europe, where this war is taking on rapidly some particularly frightening dimensions. I want to point out here as well that Joe Biden's moon is exactly conjunct this solar eclipse. So his moon is at just 1 degree. So it's 1 degree off the sun and the moon here with Venus. Everything that I have said about the moon, take to heart and apply it to Joe Biden. Also, his Mars is exactly on the south node by 1 degree. His Mars is at 12 degrees 35 minutes of Scorpio, and that's the south node is at 1346 of Scorpio. So guess who else has some interesting placements here? Vladimir Putin has his ascendant at 3 degrees of Scorpio. That means, once again, 1 degree off the solar eclipse. And so what's interesting is that when somebody has a moon and ascendant conjunction, that often is a really harmonious aspect. So under different circumstances, Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden could actually get along really, really well. They would feel an affinity somehow for each other. But these are not the times that we live in. And so Venus for Vladimir Putin is at 11 degrees Scorpio, so just 2 degrees off this south node. So really, really intense for these two individuals as well this time. It will equally be intense on the 8th of November, and I'll get back to that. And that will, of course, be very intense for the United States, which is having midterm elections once again in a totally chaotic astrological moment. So, and then we've got the European Union, which also has a Scorpio stellium, just like Biden. By the way, Joe Biden has the ascendant in Sagittarius, so this is also applies to Joe Biden's chart. So he has 12th house Scorpio. Once again, we see dodgy dealings going on and all kinds of things that are denied or lied about and so on. Joe Biden has been voting for war for the many decades of his career, and yet puts on this extremely sunny face, which is what a Sagittarius ascendant is able to do. Put a nice smile on it, even though the backroom dealings are extremely powerful. Now, again, I want to point out this is not political. I am not interested in particularly the polarized party politics of the United States. I'm interested in honesty and revealing where we are not seeing things clearly. So just to put the characters on the stage, I think that's very important. Scorpio ascendant is also, just like Putin has, is also capable of holding lots of secrets. Scorpio is very secretive energy. And so we want to, bear these things in mind. There are no saints and angels in this picture. It's really important to keep that perspective. But, and again, there we are. Those are the rulers that count the most at this stage. So let's have a look at exactly where the eclipse is happening. We can see that many parts of Europe will see some form of dimming of the sun at this time. The pin is dropped where Moscow is, so we can see that as the capital of Russia. We can see where Ukraine is just below that, Belarus just behind that. And we're seeing where the color gets darker is where there's more and more power behind the eclipse. Now, traditionally, it was always said that where the eclipse is seen the strongest is where the greatest impact of the eclipse will be felt. Now, it does go all the way down into South Asia, it goes into the Middle East, but mostly it centers on Russia and Kazakhstan. So it's central Russia, Kazakhstan, and then it's still quite powerful as it moves outwards. So all of the rest of Russia, the Central Asian countries, and, this is very important because it's covering the Black Sea as well, particularly where this war is being fought. If you look just beneath where the indication is for Ukraine, you can see the Black Sea, and you'll see Crimea, which looks a little bit separated from Ukraine. This is the place where wars have been fought for centuries between Russia and Ukraine. And now we're in a situation where that is actually in the hot zone of this eclipse. It's worth noting that you will still feel the effects, even if it's not close to home. So, for example, if you are in the States or Canada, this is still going to be felt. South America, Southern Africa. So the eclipse is felt universally. It's just that there's more potential for it to be considered stronger where it's visible. So, interesting times indeed. This is something that we're going to have to pay attention to in the weeks ahead, and certainly around the time of this eclipse. Now, Mars rules this eclipse, and it also rules that Jupiter. And so Mars features really, really powerfully here. And as I mentioned before, we've got Mars in Gemini going very, very slowly because it's preparing to go retrograde. And Mars will be retrograding on the 30th of October. So right in between the two eclipses. So there's going to be quite a lot of energy for aggravation and frustration, a sense of needing to get stuff done. Whereas Venus and Ketu together are a bit complacent about stuff like that, a bit complacent around money or relationships and loss of money or whatever. It's like kind of, oh, whatever, it's okay. I mean, it's come easy go. It is going to show up one way or another in the next few weeks and certainly months. But there can be challenges around money and relationships and what we value and so on. So this complacency shouldn't make you switch off your intellect, to switch yourself off and not pay attention to what is going on. Rahu in the placement in Taurus, as well as Uranus, are both in Bharani, which is about this really strong intellect. It's very capable intellect, but it also is representing a clash with authority. And we've still got a square between Uranus and Saturn, which is speaking about the same thing. It's a bit less than a degree away, but it's still quite strong. These are slow-moving planets, and definitely something to keep in mind at the same time. So lots and lots of movement towards rebellion and changing things up through what we value, through markets, through our emotional relationship to what's going on. And again, that can happen individually in your life. But most importantly, I feel collectively, we're seeing this real interest in getting out there and confronting the energy of deception, the powers that be, and what they're doing. So as I mentioned, that Ketu and Venus and Moon with the Sun in Scorpio all point to secrecy, but also with that in conjunct to Jupiter at the Aries point, that can be secrets revealed. So very interestingly, just on Monday, so the 10th of October, and well within the frame of energy of the eclipse cycle, Pfizer admitted to the European Parliament that their vaccines were never tested for the spread or transmission of COVID. And they were challenged by a Dutch MEP called Robert Roos, who was able to get this admission almost casually by the representative, a lady called Mrs. Small. And she basically said, we never studied that. And these vaccines were sent to market. We had assurances from virtually every single government plus the World Health Organization that the necessary tests had been done, and more importantly, that vaccines do stop transmission. And many people lost their jobs around this. People who couldn't have the vaccine for whatever reason, or did not want to have the vaccine for whatever reason, were demonized by the government, by heads of government who actually call people selfish, dangerous. There was such extreme language about this, and it's all based on a lie. And once again, this secrecy is being exposed now, Jupiter at the Aries point, pulling up these secrets. And this is a big, major scandal with international implications for social and medical and economic implications. And this is, I feel, the beginning of something quite big, as probably it will not be shown on the evening news because Pfizer sponsors the evening news, and certainly in the United States. In the rest of the Western world, the mainstream media basically toes the line of whoever they get their funding from, which often is Big Pharma. So you will have to research this. Going on the European Union website, you won't find it either, because the European Commission is embroiled in a scandal with Pfizer. Because Ursula von der Leyen actually was negotiating inappropriately directly by text with the head of Pfizer. And this is going against all public procurement rules, probably costing more than it should have cost at the time. But now, even more importantly, clearly something that was not as reliable as we were told that it was. These mandates were very, very powerful. You'll remember people were not allowed to travel. They were not allowed to go out. They were not allowed to see dying relatives in hospital or in their homes, all on the basis that until they got vaccinated, they were at risk of transmitting the disease. And if they weren't vaccinated, they were going to spread the disease to the elderly and anyone who was ill. This kind of division in our society really split a chasm that was much deeper than it had already been growing. And that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think we're at this point now where that chasm is so great that it's going to be difficult to recover from unless we can come together as people recognizing that we've been played, and surprise surprise, the government has been lying to us. I know it's like such a cliche, but most people actually don't really think about these things. And here at this particular eclipse, I think we're going to be shown in spades. Again, that event that already happened on Monday in the European Parliament, that is already showing up. This action of Jupiter, which is in this real tension with the secrecy, and the duplicity and the backroom dealings of this K2 Venus Moon Sun in Scorpio. So yeah, these are interesting times, but it's also time to be on high alert in terms of how you live your life, so that you can recognize where there are certain things that you need to choose. And this is where I'm going to come in to describe a little bit about Swati. Swati nakshatra is where we find this solar eclipse, and Swati is it's all about this challenge around emotions, around maybe harshness as well in relationships, challenges that provoke a change, that provoke us to look at life differently. So somehow our relationships will be transformed. And that, again, although some of this sounds very negative, I always hold the notion that the negativity is about breaking things down. It's about making things so uncomfortable we're forced to change. And this is how the nodes work. They're not comfortable. They're not helpful. they mess stuff up, but they bring much needed change, and they evolve us as we go through these big leaps, big steps forward with every eclipse. They evolve us through our lives, but they help us to evolve through our lives. So the transformation of relationships, the transformation of the economy, of money matters, that all of that will bring us to a better place. Interestingly, also on the topic of money, globally speaking, it's been a while already since China has stopped buying up debt from the United States. Same thing with Japan. That's what keeps the United States afloat, in not that it is entirely afloat, but it's got, I don't know, is it 31 trillion US dollars in debt? And the Chinese own a lot of that debt, and they would buy the debt, but they're not doing that now because the United States has been so sort of aggressive towards China, stirring up a lot of trouble around Taiwan. It's the mistake that Hitler made in the Second World War, which is to declare war both on the West as well as the Soviet Union simultaneously. That's not a good move. And here we've got the States, bizarrely, provoking not only the Russian there, but also the Chinese. It's like a quarter of the world's population. It makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. So we're seeing that money markets are recognizing something's going very, very wrong. It's very risky, unreliable. And now the world is starting to team up against the United States and the Western governments that are provoking a lot of these catastrophes that we're living through right now, whether it be war or economic disruption. And they are starting to create their own money markets. They are starting to create their own way forward without the purview of the United States, excluding them entirely. So the other aspect of this is not just the detachment that we're needing to hold here, that lets us separate ourselves from this material experience of life and move towards a realm of spiritual awakening, a realm of understanding that this is impermanent anyway, that this is about transformation. Scorpio is where everything is transformed and improved because of that transformation, moving into something difficult to move outwards into something better in a non-material way with K2 there. But there's a lot of fear with K2 around, especially in Swati. All of these planets are in Swati nakshatra, and this is what that fear is around obligations and demands, and that will apply individually if you've got planets in these degrees, but it of course applies to us collectively. So the moon in general represents the public, it represents the people, the sun represents leaders, and Venus, of course, represents our stuff and our markets and our money and everything like that. So here we're really seeing a lot of stuff being dredged up around fears of what we're going to be able to withstand, what's going to be asked of us, what's going to be required of us to get through this. So a lot of discord at the moment around markets and prices and the value of things, currency, desire. This is all of it going to lead to clashes with authorities. This is Rahu in Swati, clashes with authorities. Sun in Swati, clashes with authorities. Sun in Swati nakshatra also is finding, it always finds challenges in achieving goals. So it's not that we're not going to be able to necessarily do this easily. It's going to require big effort naturally. So it's again, it sounds extremely challenging. I would prefer to look at this as a challenge and confront it head on, and recognize that we will need to go through some major changes that we have never had to experience before. But coming out on the other side of it, we start to understand the actual meaning of our lives, the real value of stuff. You know, with Ketu, again, with Venus, doesn't really value stuff, doesn't really get the value of stuff, kind of doesn't care so much about it. And this has caused us so much difficulty in the world, this abusing the planet, abusing material stuff, abusing life forms like animals and trees, plants, the oceans. All of these things are now really coming to a peak where we understand, well, all of that is what is causing so much of this tension right now, coming to a peak of connection with this solar eclipse. So we're really here on the precipice of a possible liberation. This is, you know, the other symbol of Ketu is moksha. It's freedom, it's liberation from the bondage of this life. So it's letting go of all those material things. And Jupiter, by the way, is in Uttara Bhadrapada, which is a nakshatra that tells the same story. This is also where we find Neptune telling the same story, which is about having a sense of what we can surrender, you know, for a higher good, surrendering material stuff, surrendering this attachment to material things for a higher purpose. So many repeated messages in this chart. It's quite extraordinary. You know, again, there is the positive aspect of it. If you want to see that from the point of view of how we can proceed through our own experience of life, is very much that it's about our capacity to overcome. Scorpio is incredibly powerful, and the capacity to overcome is always there. And this is where we start to find that we let go of the falseness of stuff. You know, we let go of the false aspects of life so that we can look squarely at what is real, what is really there. Sometimes life is just so challenging, we just don't have the choice but to surrender. One thing that we have to learn from Ketu, wherever Ketu is, but particularly in Swati, is to surrender and not try to control, you know, all these things. Ketu creates events that leave us no choice. So we have to recognize that there are certain things which require a certain amount of maturity and stoicism. We just have to recognize these are really crunchy times that require us to face up to what life really means and not hold on to the really temporary and actually fundamentally unimportant stuff of life. So because Ketu is the headless aspect of the nodes, so the nodes mythologically are like a dragon, and Rahu is the head of the dragon, always insatiable because it has a head but no stomach. It can consume things constantly, expand into things, expanding into whatever energy of the sign that it's in and without whatever planet that it's within, but it can never fulfill itself because it has no stomach. It can't use all of that stuff that it's consuming. And so Ketu is the opposite. Ketu has the body but no head, and as a result it's blind, and that symbolizes us as well. We're blind to what's going on. So we're really often just not aware of how much our past, again Ketu past, has affected us, and how we have been not really paying attention but kind of on automatic pilot. And now we're going to have to pay attention. One thing that you can do in the traditional way of working with Ketu is we honor the planets, the energy of the planets that is the most difficult, which of course this time around is Ketu in Scorpio. And one way to honor Ketu is to offer money, donate money to the needy. Ketu symbolizes poor people, people who are in distress. It symbolizes dogs as well. You could feed stray dogs if there are any around you, or give money to a dog shelter or adopt a dog or volunteer at a dog shelter. This is the energy that will appease that energy of Ketu, is looking after the weaker members of society. I think this is very valuable these days where food banks are growing all around us. This is really, really crazy days, crazy, crazy times. So be careful if you're basing your decisions on past life or this future projection, you're maybe not seeing things as clearly as you could. And so keep centering yourself in that spiritual self, in that spiritual awareness of your life, and recognize where it's really only from this present moment awareness that we can act responsibly, that we can act going forward. Another aspect from the economic and finance markets and other markets point of view is that the big crash that happened on the 1st of November in 1929, which set off the Great Depression of the 1930s, happened in Swati nakshatra, 1 degree away. And so that's being sort of triggered in this way because these things rhyme, if you like, historically. So we are seeing some time that is, some period of time ahead that is going to be quite intense. And I think we are looking at the beginning of a few years of real challenges from the material perspective. And so the solution there is always going to be to take it up a notch and always look from the perspective of what is my real purpose here. My stuff is not my purpose here. Some relationships are there to teach us lessons, but they're not there to be full lifetime relationships, whether that be friends or intimate partners or business partners. We learn. And so one of the things that you can reflect on in this time is, a question that I think is helpful to remember anytime things are difficult is not why is this happening to me, but what can I learn from this? How can I grow through this? And look at that from that point of view of resilience, where you recognize that you are the observer of all of this. You're not caught up in all of it. That's what Christ meant by being in the world, not of it. Another thing that Swati represents is justice and fairness and independence. It's also about business interests, and especially when Venus is there, and realizing the importance of living independently, being self-reliant. This is Swati Nakshatra. So if you have placements around these degrees, that's also a part of your life's understanding, your life's path, as it were, and not relying on others, becoming more self-sufficient, self-reliant. But the thing is that the desire to break free from any other controls, which is, represented by Rahu on the opposite side in Bharani, that's not necessarily to say that we know how to use that freedom. So that's a completely different kettle of fish. Where we see Bharani, where Rahu is, it is about control, and it's about being sensing that you feel restricted and sort of dominated in many ways. And there we've got that energy not only of Rahu, but Uranus telling us break free from all of this, as well as Swati in with Venus there saying, stand on your own 2 legs and know this is really about growing independently. Don't be too reliant on the media or on the government or on other authorities that are not resonating with your genuinely felt experience of life. And because that Ketu is headless, it's not seeing what it doesn't see. So that blindness is something to remember as we go through this period of time. We don't see, we don't know what we don't know. And that's quite a helpful thing to remember. Again, I don't want to sound all gloom and doom. This is really about awareness. It's about recognizing, okay, this is going to be challenging. There's going to be stuff coming up that we collectively need to deal with. Once again, the individual signs are going to be much more varied, and individuals, according to where they are in their lives, will have great benefits coming out of this. And indeed, for some people collectively as well, there will always be benefit, just, to put things in context. So on that note, I'm hoping that I'm leaving you with a sense of, I got this, I can do this, this is going to be difficult, and I can do it. because we really don't have a choice. And going through life wishful thinking, hoping for the best, is not going to bring great advancement either socially or in our spiritual progress. Hang in there regardless of what's happening. You'll be up for change one way or the other. I always see change as a liberation from one step to another, feeling yourself growing. Remember the question, not why is this happening to me, but what can I learn from this, and keep growing through that. And I'll see you in the all signs video coming up very soon.